There are stories buried so deep they were never meant to surface, records sealed, names erased, and origins lost in the shifting ink of forgotten ledgers. But once in a while something escapes, not by accident, by design. This story begins in 1871 when a child, no name, no kin, was placed with the Carrion family in the remote township of Duskfield. He was listed only as male, 9 years old, quiet demeanor, but what they didn't list was far more chilling. No birth record, no medical file, and the photograph attached to his intake form, unfaded, unaged, untouched by time. Even then something was wrong, and someone somewhere wanted it hidden. This is not folklore, this is not legend, this is a matter of record, except the records don't agree. The boy, known only as Subject 191, appeared in 3 registries at once. Foster intake, correctional intake, medical observation, the same image, the same child, but placed 3 times, and then returned each time. What was he? Or better yet, who sent him? The Carrion family foster file notes only this: child placed under provisional order, suitability confirmed, no objections from household. But that phrase, no objections noted by household, was circled in pencil during a 1903 state review. Why? Because it never appeared again in any ledger, and in 1873 the Carrion family sent the boy back. No explanation, just a note in red, return accepted, health verified. But here's where it fractures. The boy had no symptoms, no illness, and no signs of injury. He wasn't removed for cause, he wasn't relocated for care, he was simply reversed. When state officials reviewed the file decades later, they discovered something else. The clerk who signed his placement, Elias Bourne, swore under oath in 1902 that he had never filed a Carrion placement. And yet his signature matched perfectly, every stroke, every loop, identical. Bourne. He said this: "That is my hand, but I never held that page." His affidavit was logged under objection. The document was not withdrawn. It remains intact. Ink does not lie, but neither does weight. In 1891, the boy resurfaced at the Black Hollow Reformatory. Intake register lists him as mute, behaviorally neutral, 9 years old. Again, his file was marked as permanent interim, a status created for inmates pending identification. No one visited, no file followed, no crime was noted, only a vague charge of theft with no property named. Guards rotated quarterly, but across entries one note repeats: does not speak, does not age. His caloric intake was minimal, yet he showed no signs of malnourishment. Medical reports marked his weight unchanged for over a decade. One nurse wrote, skin cold, no lesions, no shivering. But the most disturbing entry, no sleep cycles observed, eyes open at all checks. Subject 191 was not violent, not disruptive. He simply remained, and over time the staff stopped trying to understand him, because nothing changed, nothing ever did. In 1902, Warden Fenwick Graves attempted to reassign 191's bunk during a population shuffle, but the bed wouldn't fold. The mattress resisted removal. Underneath, a grid of dust impressions marked the frame, like something had been pressing down without ever moving. Graves left the bunk untouched. The last mention of 191 appears in a logbook from February 1904. Bunk inventory lists his frame as vacant, no release order, no death certificate, just a blank space and the note, status held open. When the file was reviewed in 1972 for digitization, it was gone. In its place, an envelope marked inactive minor. Inside, a blank ledger card. Across the top, 3 words faintly embossed, almost hidden in the fibers: kept, not kept, recorded. The State Archive could not explain the card's origin, nor could they explain the ink. It matched no known supplier. But beneath it all, one truth remained. The boy had not been erased. He had been moved. Again. In 1928, a state project aimed at cataloguing anomalous casts. Files flagged Subject 191 due to the absence of Guardian data and the presence of multiple intake photos, all identical, all undamaged. The file had been listed under 3 designations: 03B, Duskfield, Elam Township, and 191, Black Hollow. Handwriting analysis revealed disturbing anomalies. 7 distinct handwriting styles marked the 1873 reassignment form. None matched known clerks. None matched known samples. One note beside the child's name read, "Returned due to compatibility error." The ink on this note reversed stroke pressure, heavier at the end, not the start. Impossible under natural handwriting. Analyst Marcus Dane concluded, "Not penmanship, not typeface, deliberate creation without origin." Staff names listed on the form were traced. None had employment records before 1875. One, J. Halcroft, was listed dead in 1872, yet his name appears on a document dated 1873. Dane's final note: "If these are human hands, they are not repeated elsewhere in county records." The ink. Tested. It turned crimson under ammonia vapor, a reaction unseen in standard. By 1891, the boy was no longer listed under any familial designation. The Halbert household had long since vanished from record, their property sold, and their name struck from county ledgers without probate or public notice. What remained was a number, Subject 187, filed under the Crowswell State Asylum Intake Register. He was listed as mute, age 9, transferred from Woodbine detention under provisional custody. No parental origin, no crime, just a note. Returned from failed placement. But failed by whom? The intake officer, Enoch Drexler, signed the form, his signature trembling as if written under duress. Drexler's own notes, scribbled hastily in a logbook, spoke of unease. Eyes do not close, no verbal response, flesh cool, responsive, no distress noted. For 13 years, the child's records never changed. Not his age, not his weight, not even his behavior. Medical staff rotated, nurses came and went. Each left a note, a pattern of observations that defied logic. One nurse in 1894 noted, "Pupils dilate without light trigger, no blink reflex under standard conditions." Another in 1897, "Body temperature unchanging, does not sleep, responds only to deliberate gaze." And always the same intake photo was used, unaged, undiminished, untouched by time. A boy in a creased linen shirt with no fear, no hunger, no voice. The food brought to him often returned untouched. Caloric logs marked him as malnourished, yet his body bore no signs of withering. No bones protruded, no skin paled. And when they tried to measure his pulse, more than one doctor noted an anomaly. Pressure reactive, but pulse absent. They called in specialists from the state capital. One by one they reviewed the case, but none filed an official report. Instead, the margins of his file filled with cryptic notes. Still here, not absent, still present. And beside the log of his bed frame, a note with no signature read, "Indentations remain even when unoccupied." Dust patterns on the mattress never shifted. The boy's presence left no noise, no breath, no disturbance. Yet he was always there, eyes open, unmoving, unblinking, waiting. When the State Archive initiated a review in 1953, the intake photo was again examined. Despite its age, the photo had not faded, the wax seal pliable as if pressed yesterday. And beneath that image, pressed faintly into the page, 4 words barely discernible: age verified, time not. No ink, only pressure from another page, a message not meant to be read, a record not meant to exist, and still the boy remained. The deeper they dug into the records of Crowswell State Asylum, the more impossible the timeline became. The intake date never shifted. April 2, 1891, yet the annotations around Subject 187's file told a different story. An entry from 1903 marked in red pencil stated, "Still awaiting reassignment," but there was no record of any reassignment ever being scheduled. The logbooks recorded him in the same bed, cell block B, bunk 14, every year without fail. Guards rotated shifts, new names filled the rosters, but every guard's note, across decades, echoed the same chilling detail. Eyes open at every check. 3 o'clock a.m., 4 o'clock a.m., noon, no change. A senior warden, Horace Tillman, once attempted to move the boy during a capacity reshuffle. What he reported was later redacted, but a handwritten copy survived in the margins of an internal memo. The mattress resisted lifting, not weight, not mass, pressure, like tension locked in place. Under forensic review in 1931, Tillman's signature was confirmed authentic, but the memo bore an unsanctioned seal. No one knew who added it. Just the words, "Do not disturb compatibility hold." It was during a janitorial inspection in February 1904 that the boy's bunk was marked vacant for the first time. Yet no departure was processed, no release form, no death certificate, no transfer order. The intake sheet remained pinned to the foot of the bed, unmoved. But when the staff checked beneath the bed frame, they found the same grid of indentations pressed into the dust, perfectly matching a child's form, fresh, undisturbed, and yet no one had seen him leave. When this anomaly was flagged in 1906 during an archive consolidation, the intake folder for Subject 187 was mysteriously missing. In its place, an envelope labeled "Non-Adult Inactive" contained a blank ledger card, untouched. Across the top of that card, pressed with faint pressure, were 3 haunting words: kept, not kept. What followed was silence, bureaucratic silence, the kind of silence where files vanish and memories falter. But the boy, he was still somewhere in the system. When investigators reopened the cold, hollow logs in 1928, they discovered the same intake photograph, unaltered, unaged, and beneath it, a new note, not in ink, not in pencil, but embossed from beneath the paper itself. Still recorded. Not alive, not dead. Just present. Eternally. Like a ghost. They called it a bureaucratic error, a misfiled document, a clerical oversight. But when 3 separate institutions, Crowswell Asylum, Ripley Orphan Registry, and Jennings County Detention, listed the same child, the same image, and the same intake number within the same decade, the pattern could no longer be dismissed. The name had long since vanished from every form, just a number remained. 187. In 1928, the Indiana Bureau of Records began a forensic pilot program. Their goal? Uncover anomalies in orphan case histories using new methods like ink pigmentation analysis and handwriting forensics. The case of Subject 187 was flagged immediately. Why? The absence of guardian names, the presence of a photo with no ink notations, and the most damning 3 separate identifiers across one file: Jennings County Code 03FE, Ripley Elam Placement, and Crowswell Inmate 187. These files were supposed to be distinct, but they weren't. They were all one file, split and reassembled over time. The forensics expert Lauren Cray examined the ink under high magnification. What he found unnerved him. The signatures did not match any known staff from the era. Worse, some mimicked human handwriting but lacked the natural hesitation of real pen strokes. It was as if they were made to look human, but weren't. One note beside the boy's name read, "Returned due to compatibility error." Cray compared this to staff ledgers from the same year. The pressure on the strokes was reversed, heavier at the end of each letter, not the start. This wasn't just bad penmanship. It was something else. And another annotation written in serif block letters stated, "Assigned WO match." Cray circled it. His comment, "Not typeface, not calligraphy. Something deliberate without origin." The ink itself was another mystery. Standard iron gall ink from the 1800s should have turned rust brown under ammonia. But this ink turned blue, then read. No known ink of that century behaved this way, and when Cray attempted to trace the listed clerks, Romilly, Nash, Wills, not one had employment records prior to 1875. And Nash, he was listed as signing a form in 1873, but had been buried in 1872. Cray's final note scribbled in fear: no signatures match, no styles repeat, only the boy remains consistent, and he does not write. The file had become a trap, a recursion, something shifting behind the veil of state archives, building its own mythology. The deeper we dig, the more the walls close in, not around the boy, but around the truth. The original fostering document, dated August 6, 1871, seemed ordinary at first, just another ledger entry in Jennings County's foster registry. It bore all the familiar marks: a child code, an intake stamp, and the signature of County Clerk Enoch Bellar, a man who had served 12 quiet years without scandal. His name appeared in smooth black ink, deliberate, practiced: E. Bellar. The paper was linen-lined, watermarked with the seal of Indiana Record Supply Company standard issue between 1867 and 1873. No anomalies, no errors. The child's name, omitted. Just male, unknown parentage, quiet demeanor. He was assigned to the Kendry family under Provisional Order 27C. The final note in red ink simply read, "Foster suitability approved, child health verified." It should have ended there, but 3 lines down, another note: "No objections noted by household." That phrase, ordinary to the untrained eye, appeared nowhere else in the ledger. In 1902, during a state review triggered by an anonymous inquiry into juvenile admissions at Crowswell Reformatory, this phrase was circled in pencil. Investigators reached out to retired clerk Enoch Bellar, then living quietly in a boarding house in Madison, Indiana. On March 9, 1902, Bellar gave a sworn affidavit. "I recall no such file. I did not place a Kendry child in any home under that designation. If my name appears on such a document, it is not by my hand." Forensic analysis was conclusive. His signature on that form matched 86 out of 86 other documents. Same looping B, same hesitation on the cross of the T in clerk. And yet Bellar stared at that signature for 3 full minutes. His final words: "That is my hand. But I never touched this file. It's not forgetting. It's absence. I know the weight of a page when it has passed through my fingers. This one never did." His statement was filed under Objection 12A. No withdrawal, no amendment, just a note at the back of the ledger. Signature confirmed, memory contested. But the record remains, intact, undisturbed. Between its pages, faint indentations appear where a pen once rested too long. No words, just pressure, repeated, as if the hand that signed it. In November of 1910, the Jennings County Courthouse prepared for a long-overdue overhaul of its aging heating system. Beneath the eastern foundation wall, beyond a disused ash chute, 2 masons discovered a hidden recess, sealed, silent, untouched for decades. Inside it, wedged between brick and timber, they unearthed a steel cash box, its edges blackened by fire but the lock intact. No registry number, no label. When forced open, it released not the dry smell of old parchment but a stench of burnt oil. Within was a single item, a hand-bound ledger, spine cracked, cover blank. 4 pages. The first 3 water-damaged and empty. The 4th, it held a single entry. No embellishment. Centered, cold, absolute. Subject: male, minor, Kendry placement. No intake number. No date of birth. Below it, under status: compatibility suspended. That phrase, alien to any known welfare protocol, stood alone. No clerk signed the page. No official stamp followed. When presented to County Clerk John Harrow, he recorded it under discovery log but marked it non-canonical, a term reserved for items that defied all record-keeping standards. His internal note: no known authorization for this format. Not an accepted document, not filed with Origin Registry. Still, he did not destroy it. He sealed it again, vaulted it, shelved under miscellaneous furnace wall. But in 1912, an archivist inspecting Foster records found something else, an extra page in the 1873 transfer ledger. Page 403. The ledger ended at 402. This final page was blank, save for faint bleed-through from the preceding page. Its reverse showed indentations in the shape of a square, as though it had long been pressed against a hardbound cover. Forensic ink analysis in 1936 revealed coal ash residue, identical to that used in the courthouse's furnace, last active in 1901. A letter from the courthouse's 1911 maintenance log include De Mason's complaint. Box didn't shift like metal, it gave like damp cloth. Inside smelled of burnt oil, not paper. The foreman dismissed it. Logged, boxed, buried again. No record exists of who sealed the ledger inside the wall. No mechanism explained how it was entombed behind structural stone before the courthouse was even completed. But someone wrote that entry. Someone suspended compatibility. Someone made sure that even buried beneath stone, this boy's file would never close. It would take nearly 70 years before that buried ledger would surface again, but when it did, it wasn't because of discovery, it was because of a mistake. In 1979, a misfiled archive code triggered a judicial backlog audit, pulling restricted documents into review. Among them was a deposition never intended for public eyes. 6 pages, dictated but never notarized. It was labeled only, Warden E. Roth Statement, Re. Inmate, 221. Roth had served as warden of the Clark County Correctional House for over 30 years. He retired in 1912 but gave this statement in 1933 from a sanatorium where he was treated for tremors and sleep paralysis. He spoke of a boy, admitted May 3, 1891. No name, just a photograph. The image, Roth said, was pristine, no fading, no degradation, unnatural for its age. The boy, 9 years old, no known parentage, no record of crime beyond a vague theft accusation. His cell was marked with a designation Roth had created himself, permanent interim, for cases without identification, pending classification. But this boy's status never changed. 13 years, and no reclassification. Roth's voice, shaking yet firm, detailed what he called the waiting years. No visits, no filings, no parole, just reports. Endless reports. Every 6 months I filed. Every 6 months I asked who he belonged to. The system gave no answer. But then, 1903, something shifted. After refusing food for 9 days, the boy was placed in infirmary isolation. A nurse reported he mouthed something, a word she couldn't understand. Roth demanded repetition. The boy didn't speak. He blinked. 118 times. The nurse counted aloud, notebook in hand. On the final count, she dropped it. I thought it was a seizure, Roth recalled, but he wasn't shaking. He was staring straight at me. Roth filed a false log, claimed the boy was transferred to psychiatric observant. Iron. He wasn't. Roth simply couldn't bear writing the same report anymore with no explanation. Then the record ends. No release, no death, no transfer. Just a blank line. And one faint stamp, reclassification pending. The final page of Roth's statement, in handwriting that was not his own, bore 7 chilling words. It was not a word. It was a number. 118 blinks. No one decoded it. No other inmate ever received the classification permanent interim. No other ink in the entire state matched the kind found in the margin of that page. It was never about where. The deeper we follow this boy, now known only by his intake number 221, the more we see a system not designed to lose him but to hold him indefinitely. In 1873, 3 intake surveys were filed for the child. Each one bore different initials, different dates, but every line under aptitude, behavioral risk, and prognosis carried the same chilling mark, NA, Not applicable. It was a common shorthand, but never repeated 3 times across separate filings. Even less common was its usage in future tense. Every entry used present tense, as if whoever filled them out knew the child would not change. The 1874 orphan census didn't include him with the standard entries. Instead, he appeared on a separate sheet titled Deferred Classification. 8 names, 7 crossed out over time, reassigned, removed, or buried. Only the Stoddard boy remained. His file was stamped each quarter, re-evaluation recommended, but no one ever evaluated him. One correction in the margin of the 1875 roster reads in faint graphite, still on file, still waiting placement, still not crying. That detail, no crying, no fear, no anger, removed him from the institutional triage. He wasn't helped because he wasn't threatening, and he wasn't threatening because he wasn't human enough to worry about. In 1881, a new protocol audit changed everything. A review board was established to classify unresolved juvenile intakes. One case was flagged as status ambiguous. The report penned by Dr. Alton Shaw was never finalized, but the fragments tell us more than he intended. Subject does not respond to linguistic stimuli, but is not deaf, exhibits no resistance, cannot be taught, breath unchanged under duress. This is not mutism. This is not defiance. The final line was scratched out, but still visible under light. He blinks in order. Blinks in order, not a reflex, not random, intentional. When Indiana passed the 883 Uniform Child Welfare Mandate, hundreds of orphans were reclassified. The boy's file was reviewed. No revision necessary. That meant no reassessment for someone who had shown no movement, no speech, no distress for over 10 years. A correction added that same year to subsection D of the mandate contained a sentence that applied to no other child in the state. Subjects lacking developmental velocity without accompanying illness or disorder shall remain on holding rolls until such time as mobility or decline justifies reassessment. The phrase developmental velocity was used once, here, and then deleted from every future procedural manual. What kind of child required a law to justify his never-ending observation? One not meant to grow. When archivists unearthed the boy's records decades later, they expected decay, paper yellowed, ink faded, the standard erosion of time. But instead they found something chilling. The ink had not run. The pages had not aged. In 1938, during a routine audit after a storm flooded Indiana's welfare annex, a clerk stumbled across a misfiled folder, Box R221A. It carried no catalog code, no inventory slip, only a date, October 12, 1935. Inside, a reassignment envelope bore a singular name in block lettering, Stoddard. No first name, no legal designation, just return subject. Below it, a cryptic phrase, compatibility cycle incomplete. This wasn't a standard form. It had no intake number, no guardian signature. Where the recipient's name should have been, the form read, return to loop. The term loop does not appear in any state welfare protocol from that era or any before it, and yet it was stamped with an official approval, T. Lemley, regional supervisor. There was just one problem. Lemley had died in 1931, 4 years before the form's date. His death certificate, numbered 129093A, confirmed his burial, yet the stamp was genuine. His ink, his seal, somehow used posthumously. Further analysis of the ink revealed it contained animal-based glue and high carbon content, a formula phased out in 1902. It shouldn't have existed, let alone been used in 1935. An internal memo from 1956 asked whether to escalate or discard the file. There's no record of a reply. The only note on the back in faint pencil read, "If reassigned again, pull oldest first. Do not forward past cycle." Past cycle. That phrase has never appeared in any Indiana child welfare manual. The file was flagged for scanning in 1971, but when inserted into the machine, the document jammed. The technician's report described something bizarre. Feed error, loop detected, page attempted, return to tray. It wasn't a misfeed. So the machine claimed the page was trying to return, a digital impossibility, and when the Bureau of Child Welfare Modernization attempted digitization in 1974, the name Stoddard triggered 12 non-indexed hits. Same case number, multiple locations, no given name. Always pending, always reassigned, never resolved. He was marked reintegrated in some files, pending suitability in others. Never once marked deceased. How can a child cycle through a system for over 60 years without aging, without closing, without ending? Only one answer remained. The file was never meant to. In the twilight maze of bureaucratic records, most files die quiet deaths, archived, forgotten, dust-choked in metal drawers. But the Stoddard file refused. It migrated through state systems over 114 times between 1871 and 1955, more than any juvenile entry ever recorded in Indiana. Every 3.4 years, it moved, without request forms, without signatures, without explanation. Clerks signed off without receiving the child. Why? Pressure, they said, to reduce backlog, to clear space. One note, scrawled in haste from Ripley County in 1927, simply read, "File here again, not sure why, let it rest this time." But rest never came. Some dismissed it as a ghost file, a system glitch, a clerical phantom. Others feared the truth, that someone was keeping it alive, not out of error, but purpose. When an internal researcher cross-referenced Stoddard's number with incarceration logs from 1891 to 1904, he found more than paperwork. He found a photograph. A cabinet card, pristine, untouched by time, identical to the image recovered from the Stoddard estate archives. The boy, unaged, uncreased, unchanged. 2 decades, one face, one stare. In 1975, during a purge of inactive records, the system flagged a file as corrupted. The attempt to delete it failed. The database returned a chilling note, document locked in motion. It flagged it as bad metadata, but on the printed error ticket beneath the warning, a line appeared. No staff claimed to write it. It read, "System memory not lost. It is being rewritten." That same year, a final folder arrived unsorted, dumped with surplus from the defunct Jennings County Orphan Bureau. No case number, just a linen tab, black line. Inside, 27 unbound leaves, blank. Each separated by thin blot paper, undisturbed, untouched, unaged. But under halogen light, the last page whispered a secret. Along its lower edge, in microscopic hand, a phrase floated beneath the paper grain, not above beneath. It read, "Still processing. No ink bleed, no signature, no explanation. Chemical analysis failed. The pressure came from beneath, as if the words weren't written, but grown into the paper itself." Someone, or something, was still tending the file, still feeding it, still ensuring it moved. It wasn't just paperwork. It was a living record, one that could never be forgotten, only passed forward. The system wasn't broken. It was obeying something older, something darker, something that refused to end. And the story could have ended there, in silence, in mystery, in a drawer no one dared to open. But in 1992, a reinventory changed everything. Archivist Dana Ellsworth was cataloging surplus when she lifted the final page of the Stoddard folder beneath a halogen lamp. What she saw wasn't on the paper, it was in it. Along the edge, a faint discoloration. Magnification revealed a microscopic inscription, one that no ink could produce. Still processing. The words were not written with a pen. They hovered beneath the fibers like a scar beneath skin. Forensic labs couldn't date it. The chemicals? Untraceable. And more disturbing, pressure had been applied from beneath the page, not above, not human. That discovery triggered an internal inquiry. Where did this folder come from? No one knew. It didn't exist in the National Orphan Archive. No submission was logged. One theory claimed it came from another state, an error in bundling. But that theory collapsed when the backing page revealed a watermark, the Indiana State Seal, dated 1870. The file was always here, hiding in plain sight. Some officials believed it was a decoy to conceal illegal reassignments. That theory died with the fingerprint analysis. On every inner tab, on every blot page, partial oil prints, small, child-sized, not registered in any juvenile or adult criminal archive. They didn't belong to any staff, any inmate, any child. On record. And these prints, they repeated, same position, same angle, on every page, as if someone, something pressed them again and again across decades. A memo from 1993 penned by Deputy Archivist Lydia Kress captured the horror of that discovery. During a midnight shift, she moved the folder. It should have been light. It wasn't, she wrote. The file was not quiet. It dragged. It weighed more than its pages. She never returned. Her resignation letter was one sentence. If he isn't assigned, he can't be processed. Microfilming failed. Every exposure, blank. Only the black line appeared. Digitization failed too. Every scan corrupted. Each attempt returned the same error. Awaiting outcome, awaiting outcome, awaiting outcome. No code explained it. No system error accounted for it. The file didn't just refuse closure, it resisted it. Locked in a loop. A cycle without end. In 2001, it was sealed in a drawer requiring 2 signatures to access. One belonged to a director who no longer exists in state employment records, and etched on that drawer's face, beneath the steel number, a phrase never written in any Stoddard file. He was fostered, returned, reassigned, incarcerated, and then forgotten. At least that's what the official records want you to believe. But nowhere, not in any courthouse, not in any prison, not in any graveyard, does the boy ever die. His age never advanced. His file never closed. And beneath the old courthouse furnace, sealed in silence and dust, his name, Warren Stoddard, still rests in a ledger that should not exist. This isn't a tale about loss or neglect. It's about something far older and far more deliberate. The kind of process that does not stop when a child disappears. The kind that doesn't rely on memory or justice, but on movement, rotation, and ritual. What was Warren? A lost boy? A bureaucratic error? Or something forged by the system itself, given breath by forms, stamps, signatures, and the endless turning of clerical wheels? Perhaps he was born of intention, of a need to control, catalogue, and command. A creation not of flesh and blood, but of ink and paper, given form through repetition, never truly alive, but never allowed to fade. His story is a warning that institutions once built do not sleep. They do not forget, and sometimes they create echoes of people that never should have existed, ghosts of record, never aging, never buried, never released. And this file, the Stoddard file, has become more than a record. It has become an object of weight, of presence. The black line on its linen tab, the child-sized prints pressed into blotting paper, the repeated uncorrupted scans. These are not accidents, they are signals. Proof that something remains. Ask yourself, if a system writes a life, moves it, stores it, stamps it, does that life become real? And if that system refuses to let it go, is that life trapped? Forever unfinished. That is Warren's legacy, not as a boy who lived, but as a process still running, still moving through the circuits of the forgotten, an unresolved line in a ledger that will never balance. This is not about a child. It's about the machine that kept him, feeding on signatures, on forgotten codes, on the ink that never fades. We must ask, how many more are there? Files like this, children like him, caught between pages, lost not in death, but in an archive that refuses to forget. If you're still watching, comment. In 1907, a series of fireproofing measures were implemented across the Montfort County government buildings. During insulation upgrades beneath the old courthouse annex, workers unearthed a sealed cavity behind the south wall. Inside, a brass tube capped in lead lay embedded in mortar. No registry logged its presence. When breached, the tube contained only a strip of vellum and a metal tag. The vellum, fragile but legible, bore no writing, just 4 creases and a burnished fingerprint, child-sized, pressed into the fold. The metal tag read simply, "Stoddard, do not file." Officials marked it as non-essential, non-archival, and discarded the find, but a clerk, curious about the child-sized print, retained the vellum in a private folder. That folder remained in a personal collection until 1946, when it was anonymously returned to the courthouse marked for return. The handwriting on the envelope, eerie in its neatness, matched no known style, and yet the message was clear. Someone, somewhere, wanted the artifact back where it had always been. Back in the walls, back in silence. What system, what agenda demands such quiet reclamation? Who watches over the threads of this child's story and ensures no one pulls too hard? Consider this. Across all entries for Warren Stoddard, from the first intake sheet to the last failed scan, no one, not once, signed their full name. Only initials, only dashes, only a circle drawn in ink. It's as if the very act of naming, of fully acknowledging his existence, would give him form outside the file, and perhaps that was the fear. That something documented long enough, processed enough times, gains its own presence. That the record writes the reality, and not the other way around. And so the file persists, not out of error, but design. It is not merely a paper trail, it is a containment that can't be broken. Because to close to declare it finished, would mean acknowledging it was real all along. And that is the true terror, that somewhere in the mechanisms of state, of welfare, of record, something was birthed that was never meant to be human, never meant to end. Warren wasn't lost, he was looped, a product of the archive of ink and memory, and every time we read his name we added. By 1953, digital processing had not yet arrived, but microfilm was king, a means to preserve, to compress, to store what must not be lost. That year, the Montfort State Archive underwent mass microfilming of juvenile intake records from the 19th century. When they reached the folder marked Stoddard, complications began. The machine jammed. The technician, a seasoned archivist named Gerald Wells, attempted a manual feed. The moment the film captured the first page, the exposure was blank. He tried again. Blank. On the third attempt, not only was the image blank, but the machine powered off entirely. Wells later wrote in his log, "File resists transfer, content undetectable, presence remains." That phrase, "presence remains," was circled by his supervisor, who then ordered a pause on all further attempts. No official explanation was given, but weeks later Wells submitted his resignation. He left only a single sentence behind. If a record cannot be stored, it cannot be forgotten. This was not paranoia. This was recognition, an awareness that something in the Stoddard file operated outside the logic of documentation. It did not want to be seen. It wanted to be moved, to be passed along, to exist only in motion. What is a file if it cannot be copied, scanned, or archived? It is an echo, a loop, not of memory, but of instruction. Stoddard's file was never about him. It was about the system's failure to contain what it had touched. When a system creates something without category, without precedent, it cannot destroy it. It can only process it again and again, hoping one more stamp, one more note will bring closure. But what if closure was never the point? What if the file was the goal all along? A file that generates fear, uncertainty, a sense of presence. A file that forces those who handle it to question what's real. That is power, not in the boy, but in the paper, the ink, the process. Because once a man sees a file that cannot die, he begins to wonder what else is. In 1961, the Montfort Archive underwent another audit, this time under federal oversight. The push was for compliance, standardization, purging of dead entries. Among the flagged items was folder M11127B, the Stoddard file. It bore no case number on the exterior, just a faint black line across a linen tab, horizontally marked, no initials, no date. The reviewer, archivist Harold Nix, noted its lack of indexing. His recommendation: purge upon verification. But when he opened the folder, he found only blank leaves, 27 unbound sheets, each separated by blot paper. No ink, no stamps, no signatures, nothing. Except on the final page beneath halogen light, a thin, discolored strip along the bottom edge. Under magnification, a microscopic line emerged. Still processing. It wasn't printed. It wasn't even written. It was embedded beneath the fibers. Pressure from below the page, not above. Nick submitted it to forensics. The lab report came back inconclusive. No ink traceable. No pressure source determined. But they found something else. Partial oil prints. Fingerprints. Child-sized. Repeating on every blot page, same position, same angle. They didn't match any known prints, juvenile or adult, in the state's criminal archives. The file didn't speak. It pressed again and again over time, as if someone or something was marking it with presence, without aging, without change. The inquiry that followed was buried. The memo simply read, "Do not process, do not destroy." But Nix, the man who opened it, didn't forget. He left the archive 6 months later. His resignation letter, one line: he won't let go. The file remained locked in storage, its movement suspended. But it had already moved. Through decades, through hands, through systems. The question was no longer who the boy was or why he stayed. The question was what had been set in motion the day he entered the system. A cycle of recording, forgetting, remembering, failing. Because the moment a file cannot be closed, it begins to write itself. And if it writes itself, who's really in control? The clerks, the state, or something older, more deliberate, feeding on the act of record itself? Ask yourself this: what happens to a system when in 1971, as digital systems began replacing paper archives, Montfort's forgotten corners were reopened. A junior technician, Daniel Croft, assigned to scan historical intake forms, discovered the Stoddard folder during a basement inventory pass. His task was simple: scan, index, archive. But when he loaded the final page, the one with microscopic writing, the scanner jammed, not once but 3 times. On the 3rd attempt, the machine sparked. The document burned slightly around the edges. Repair notes from the technician stated, "Feed error, loop detected, page attempted, return to tray." But here's what was not in the report. Croft saw the message on the scanner's error screen before it shut down. "System memory not lost. It is being rewritten." That phrase wasn't from any manual, any codebase. And when tech support reviewed the logs, that line was absent, deleted or never there to begin with. Croft, shaken, tried again days later. The page would not scan. Every attempt produced blank output, except for a faint black line repeating. When digitized manually, the file corrupted the storage drive, replacing file names with one phrase: "awaiting outcome," over and over. No metadata, no author, just the echo of a process that had no end, a process that refused deletion. By 1983, during a surplus intake from the defunct Rainsford Orphan Bureau, the folder surfaced again, unsorted, unmarked, placed in the wrong box. Inside, 27 leaves, same blot paper, undisturbed. But new fingerprints, child-sized, unregistered, identical placement, fresh. This time, archivist Dana Ellsworth found something else. While moving the file, she described it as heavy, not with weight but with presence. She logged her finding. Midnight shift, quiet room. But the file was not quiet. It hummed, not sound, pressure. She resigned within a week. Her resignation note: if he isn't assigned, he can't be processed. But he had been assigned again and again, and always returned, not deceased, not departed, just held. Ask yourself now, how do you process a presence that resists time, a file that breathes but not with lungs? And why does it keep coming back? Because systems fail, memory fails, but record persists, even when no one remembers why it In 1992, during a re-inventory initiative, Ellsworth's discovery was re-evaluated under forensic-grade halogen light. What was thought to be a blank final page yielded a narrow discoloration along the edge. Under magnification, a sentence emerged, microscopic, embedded beneath the paper's surface. It did not sit atop the fibers, it was within them, fused as though written before the sheet was even formed. The phrase, "still processing," no signature, no ink bleed, no author. Forensic labs tested the chemical composition, nothing. The ink, or whatever it was, left no trace. Pressure had been applied from beneath, not above, as if the phrase had emerged from within the paper, birthed by the document itself. And that was not the only anomaly. On every sheet of blot paper in the file, the same fingerprint appeared, same angle, same depth, repeated, not pressed once but again and again, decades apart, unchanged. This was no accidental artifact. This was ritual, each press like a signature of presence, a confirmation of return. The child it belonged to, never identified, never processed. The prints matched no existing records, juvenile or adult. And the phrase, "still processing," had no procedural meaning. It was not a status, it was a warning that something was ongoing, something that could not be closed, not with ink, not with law. In 2001, attempts to digitize the folder failed again. Every scan came out blank, except for that horizontal line, repeating like a pulse. Files corrupted, system rebooted. A phrase appeared in the logs, awaiting outcome. Staff denied writing it, but the phrase spread, found days later in unrelated logs, error tickets, even printed on a mislabeled folder across the archive. Awaiting outcome, awaiting outcome. It became a contagion, not of flesh, but of record. And as systems modernized, the Stoddard file refused to vanish, because it was never meant to vanish. It was a process without end, feeding on bureaucracy's blind rituals, persisting not in flesh, but in memory, written and rewritten by hands no one remembers, by ink that leaves no trace. This is how a child becomes permanent, a shadow cast not by body but by file. What was he? Who created him? The system couldn't answer. It only In 2003, the Department of State Archives initiated a final purge of unresolved legacy files, targeting artifacts with no provenance, no active case number, no institutional value. The Stoddard folder was flagged for destruction, but when the courier arrived to retrieve it, he refused to touch the drawer. His statement, filed under formal objection, described a sensation of weight, not physical but mental. It wasn't heavy, he wrote, but it pressed down. A director intervened, attempting to open the drawer himself. The steel lock would not turn. No damage, no obstruction, yet the mechanism refused. When maintenance finally forced it open, the drawer slid free with ease, as though it had never resisted. Inside, the Stoddard file sat undisturbed. 27 blank leaves, the linen tab intact. But now, beneath the serial number on the drawer's face, something new had appeared. Etched shallowly in script unrecorded anywhere in the archive's files were the words, "Don't close the file. He's still being written." No one claimed responsibility. No one authorized the inscription. Surveillance logs for that wing showed no access the night before. And yet the words were there, unmistakable, like a command or a plea. The file was resealed. Destruction order revoked. And in the years since, the folder has remained untouched, stored beneath a code requiring 2 signatures for access, one of which must belong to a director who no longer works there. His whereabouts unknown. His resignation letter unsigned. The Stoddard case now exists in a limbo of legal uncertainty, unresolvable, unmovable, alive not in law but in memory, preserved in systems that cannot forget, even when the men who built them have. He was fostered, reassigned, imprisoned, erased, and yet nowhere in the records does he die. His age remains static, his face unchanged, and somewhere beneath the ruins of the old court house, sealed behind stone and time, a ledger still holds his name. We were never meant to find this. We were never meant to know. This is not about a boy. It's about a mechanism, a process that began before we understood it and persists because we cannot stop it, because it feeds on attention, on records, on belief. And now that you've heard it, it's yours too. Tell me in the comments. Still processing. Still processing. Say it twice. Anchor yourself. The ledger beneath the courthouse was eventually exhumed not by archivists or officials, but by a private demolition crew contracted in 2007 to clear the site for redevelopment. The building had long since been condemned, its substructure unstable. As the eastern wall was dismantled, a fragment of scorched steel emerged from the rubble, still bearing the warping heat marks of the old furnace. Inside the melted remains of a lockbox, investigators found only ash and a single item partially preserved. A bound slip of paper, water-streaked and warped beyond recognition, except for one haunting detail. Pressed into the page, beneath layers of soot and corrosion, was the name Stoddard. No first name, no initials, just that surname again. The artifact was seized, catalogued as non-evidentiary debris, then lost during transit to the State Historical Authority. The loss was not recorded as a breach. No file was opened. But weeks later, an unrelated request for a records review flagged a familiar code, 88714443, the same number that had followed Stoddard through orphanage, prison, reassignment, and shadowed legal systems. The request was denied, but not before the search logs confirmed access from an internal terminal. No user ID, no timestamp, only the code and one notation. Status unchanged. In 2013, a graduate student at the University of Indiana researching unexplained data anomalies in state systems cross-referenced the same code. What she found was more than numerical residue, it was behavioral. The file, locked since 1983, had been accessed remotely 16 times over the previous decade, each time coinciding with system outages, document misfilings, and the unexpected appearance of blank folders in unrelated departments. The student submitted a request for review. Her request was acknowledged, then ignored. She never completed her dissertation. In the final email to her advisor, she wrote, "There's something in the file. It's not information. It's inertia. It wants to move." The advisor never replied. The email was deleted, and yet her search logs remained. Traces of a file that no longer has an owner, a purpose, or a place. Only momentum. The kind that systems cannot arrest, only accommodate. This was never about one child. It was about a design. One still active, still consuming, still recording. The name Stoddard surfaced again in 2016, this time buried in a maintenance report from a disused records facility near Hollow Creek, Indiana. The building had been slated for demolition, its contents already cleared, yet a lone worker assigned to final inspection recorded something unusual. In the basement vault, amid cracked stone and rusted shelving, he discovered a single drawer locked shut, its label worn to near oblivion. With force he pried it open, expecting dust and emptiness. Instead he found a folder, untouched by time, bearing no title, only a horizontal black line across the tab. Inside were 27 sheets of parchment-like paper, each separated by blot paper, undated and unmarked except for one, a faint impression on the final page, visible only under halogen light. The phrase, "Still observing." There was no ink, no signature, just pressure, applied not from the hand above but from beneath the paper fibers. The worker reported the find to his supervisor. The drawer was resealed, and within 48 hours the building was razed. The folder was listed in the demolition log, then expunged. But the report, filed hastily and buried in an unrelated archive, remained, and with it a warning scribbled in the margin by the worker himself. It's not just a file, it's a signal. That signal was traced by independent researchers months later, embedded in anomalies across public record systems statewide. Not malware, not corruption, a pattern of movements, small, repetitive, untraceable to human input. The data was not being altered, it was being echoed. as if the system was being reminded of something it had once known, but now could only mimic. This is not a virus. It is a presence. Silent, inert, yet immovable. When pressed, the department called it an indexing loop. But loops end. This one does not. Every attempt to isolate the error failed. Every file flagged under 887144-3 reappeared, refiled, or erased its trail. One supervisor wrote, "I've deleted this file 4 times. It always returns, wherever it wants." By 2019, the phrase "stoddered entry" became internal shorthand for problems no one could solve. It meant, let it be, let it rest. But files don't rest. Not this one. And in the deepest corridors of our systems, something is still watching, still cataloging, still writing. There is a reason certain records cannot be destroyed. A reason why some documents, despite every effort, survive flood, fire, and decay. The Stoddard file is one such record, not preserved by intention, but by force of existence. In 2021, during a routine audit of cold case juvenile entries, a state-level analyst noted an irregularity in the archival software logs. A file marked incomplete had triggered over 300 automatic preservation flags, despite no known user initiating them. The file number, 887144-3, the same, always the same. The system's fail-safes prevented deletion, citing internal justification codes not found in any current or past regulatory manual. One code simply read, "awaiting completion," yet nothing was being added, no data, no scans, just a silent request for closure that never arrives. The analyst flagged the error for supervisor review. Within 24 hours, her terminal was locked, her login credentials revoked, and her final action labeled unauthorized. No follow-up report was filed. But days later, her handwritten note surfaced in a support log. 4 words. "He's not in there." What did she mean? The file was full of movements, signatures, placements, approvals, but no boy, no image, no voice. Just echoes of decisions made, remade, and never finalized. Like a ghost story told through bureaucratic ritual, where the haunting is not a soul, but a system's failure to conclude. In late 2022, a private investigator requested public access to historical welfare documents for a documentary project. Among the files listed under restricted review was one entry bearing a caution code. "Do not forward past cycle." That phrase again, cycle. It was not a term in any procedural handbook, not protocol. It was a warning. The investigator filed appeal after appeal. All were denied. But his notes leaked, revealing a chilling hypothesis. The file, he claimed, was no what about a child, but a process. A loop of assessment, rejection, return, reassignment. Not a story of neglect, but of containment. Not a missing child, but an idea kept alive through form, signature, and ink that won't fade. He wrote, "The boy is a placeholder. The real subject is the system itself. Stoddard is the name given to something that doesn't die but can't be processed." What if the ledger was never closed? Every attempt to seal it met resistance, not from people, but from the paper itself. In 2023, the State Archives began a digitization initiative aiming to convert all pre-1900 child welfare records into encrypted cloud storage. But when the Stoddard entry was queued for scanning, the machine failed. Not mechanically, but conceptually. The scanner's error logs recorded an unprecedented loop. Page active, status not defined. Over 19 attempts were made. Each scan returned blank. No text, no markings, just static interference and a single artifact, a horizontal black line at the bottom of every image. When examined under spectral light, the original page showed no such line. It only appeared in the digital copies, as if something was being transmitted, not transcribed. Forensic analysts labeled the file corrupted, but the lead technician wrote something different in her private report. Not corruption, rejection. This file is not meant to be copied. She resigned the following week. Before leaving, she left a note in the department archive drawer. It read, Still processing, still returning. That phrase again. Returning. But to where? And why? The physical folder was then placed in storage, sealed beneath lock and biometric access. But 1 month later, it was found open. No forced entry, no access log triggered, just open. And inside, nothing missing, except for the final page. In its place, a single slip of newer paper bearing a message in block print. Process continues. Observe. Who wrote it? No one claimed authorship. No surveillance footage caught entry, yet the paper bore the same watermark as the original 1871 intake forms, a mark supposedly discontinued over a century ago. Someone had matched it. Or something had. What are we really looking at? A child out of time, or a system that learned to sustain itself through endless deferral, never resolving, never dying? The boy known as Stoddard may not be the story at all. He may be the symbol of what happens when institutions create something they can't control, then bind it in paper, sealed by process, and buried under centuries of silent compliance. What if we're not meant to find him, but to be found by him, through the ink, through the records, through every failed attempt to... A historian once said, "Paper is memory with authority." But what happens when memory refuses to fade and authority becomes prisoner to its own design? The Stoddard file isn't just a record, it's an infection. Not viral, not bacterial, but bureaucratic. Every time it is handled, referenced, or moved, it pulls another thread of the system into itself. In 1998, during a standard review of unresolved juvenile cases, a junior analyst discovered that Stoddard's identifier, code 311A, had appeared in unrelated files, immigration records, land deeds, even post-mortem registries, not under his name, but his number, always the number. In one instance, an 1876 property transfer deed in Clark Township lists owner, code 311A. No name, no location. Just coordinates that lead to an empty field. In another, a 1921 death certificate for an unidentified male bore the same code in the upper margin, yet no body was ever found, no cause of death listed, only the phrase, "returned not processed." The analyst flagged the irregularities, but before escalation the review was halted, not by her supervisors but by a memo from Department External, a label that had never appeared before in their chain of command. The directive was simple: do not pursue, file under inactive. The analyst resigned within a week. Her exit interview was only 4 words: "We don't control it." And perhaps that's the truth, that somewhere along the line, the machine of governance, of documentation, created a cycle it can no longer end. Stoddard was fostered, reassigned, detained, and erased, yet each step was incomplete, as if the system could not accept finality. Every time he was filed, he was also unfiled. Each stamp of closure was followed by a note of continuation, and the numbers followed him, not as identity, but as echo. What if code 311A isn't his designation, but the system's own mark of failure, the mark of something it could not categorize, could not dominate, and yet it remains bound to it, unable to let go? The numbers bleed across time and place because they were never just about a boy. They were about a loop, a perfect loop of process, observation, and re-entry. We are not watching a child's life unfold. We are watching an institutional memory that cannot forget. In the summer of 2003, a team from the State Historical Preservation Office undertook an archival digitization of the Galesburg Asylum's intake logs. The project was mundane at first, scanning brittle records, cross-referencing names long erased from memory, but midway through the 3rd crate they opened a folder not on the manifest. No label, no barcode, just a linen string tied around yellowed parchment. Inside, 13 photographs, all of the same boy, same posture, same blank gaze, identical across decades, no aging, no variation, and each one was stamped faintly on the back. Code 311A. Beneath that, in block print, Stoddard, return pending. The team, confused, attempted to log the discovery, but the internal server refused the upload. A notification flashed. Duplicate file exists. Yet none had ever seen it. When they checked the local index, every workstation had a different version of the file, some with 10 photos, others with 15, all claiming to be the original. The system couldn't distinguish them. Worse, it wouldn't allow deletion. An IT specialist called in for diagnostics found that every folder, every image, had been last accessed simultaneously, on the same date, at the same time, July 14, 1935, 2:03 a.m. But the digital system was only installed in 1997. That timestamp shouldn't exist. And then came the server crash. Not just corrupted files, but a recursive loop. The server began replicating the Stoddard images, embedding them into unrelated case files. A list of marriage licenses now bearing his face. A court docket, overlaid with his intake stamp. The digital archive became saturated. In desperation, the project was abandoned and the original photographs placed under seal. But even then, the damage was done. Months later, the same photos appeared in an academic journal on juvenile justice reform, submitted by a researcher who claimed to have found them in the public record. No one knows how they got there. The publisher's internal investigation found no digital source, only printouts, aged artificially, like they'd been copied from originals that never existed. It was then the team realized they weren't preserving history, they were feeding it. Stoddard's file was no longer content with dormancy. It had begun to reinsert itself into systems, into stories, into the memory of a state that cannot and will not forget. This is not just a tale of lost childhood. The state sealed the original Galesburg file under emergency protocol, restricted to high-level review only. But despite the lockdown, whispers spread. In 2009, an independent researcher named Alden Riker submitted a Freedom of Information request for access to the Stoddard archive. He cited irregularities in historical continuity and included a photograph, one no one had seen before. It was the boy sitting at an iron desk, his hands folded, eyes fixed forward. The photo bore a watermark from the defunct Wren Sons Photography, which ceased operation in 1879, but the image was dated 1926. The Bureau denied Riker's request, but he persisted, traveling to Galesburg himself. There he encountered local records clerks who had never heard of Stoddard, but when shown the photo, one woman grew pale. She claimed her grandfather, a janitor at the courthouse in 1932, once found an unlisted room in the sub-basement. Inside, only a chair and a small desk. Nothing else. On the desk, a single sheet of paper. Pending return. Do not process. The room was bricked over a week later. Riker published his findings online, claiming institutional suppression. The post went viral briefly before being wiped from the site entirely. His domain was suspended, his backup files corrupted. And then Riker disappeared. His last known communication was a voicemail to a colleague. A whisper, one line. He's not in the file anymore. He's in us. No one has heard from Riker since. His notes, recovered from a hotel room in Des Moines, were smeared with what appeared to be soot. But lab testing showed no known chemical composition, just carbon traces and an unknown protein compound. At the top of the notebook, one final phrase: Stoddard's file doesn't close because we've become it. Across all known records, one thing remains constant: the refusal of the system to release him and the system's need to replicate him. Every record, every image, every name he takes is an attempt to rewrite. This isn't archival decay. This is archival possession. And those who read too deeply are changed by it. Comment below the phrase, "The file is not empty," and write it twice. Say it. Write it. The file is not empty. Your identity. In 2015, a data restoration firm contracted by the state of Illinois was assigned to digitize long-sealed foster registries from the late 19th century. Among thousands of standard files, one box arrived with no label, no intake slip, no requisition form. It was heavy, unnaturally so, and bound in iron straps as if to keep its contents from moving. When opened, the team discovered only a single object, a wax-sealed folio with a cracked linen cover. No documents, no visible markings, just a small metal plate embedded into the inside cover, engraved with a sequence of numbers. 00128700. When scanned for metadata, the system failed. Every attempt to image the plate resulted in corrupted data. But on the final scan, one line of binary text emerged in the error log. It translated to "identity suspended, awaiting re-entry." The file was reclassified as anomalous material and transferred to state custody, but not before a technician named Hallis Ray copied the scan data. He was terminated within days for unauthorized access. Weeks later, his home was found abandoned, doors unlocked, no signs of struggle. On his desk, a USB drive, its contents, dozens of image files, all blank but one. A scan of the folio cover. When enhanced, faint scratches appear across the lower half, not random, arranged. They spell out a word in low-frequency glyphs, "Stoddard." But something was missing. The scratches weren't etched from above. They rose from within, as if the name had pushed upward through the fabric of time. Investigators dismissed the event, but 2 months later, an identical file was delivered anonymously to the Indiana Historical Society. No return address. Inside, the same wax folio, the same plate. But this time, the name engraved wasn't Stoddard, it was Ray. Hallis Ray. His name had entered the loop. His identity, processed without consent, absorbed into the archive's recursive mechanism. That's what this system does. It doesn't just record history, it rewrites it by drawing others into its cycle. The boy they could never assign has become the entity that reassigns. Not a spirit, not a person, but a function, a living, breathing file. Every name it touches, every page it imprints, is another step toward permanence. And now you've heard it. His name, his cycle. There's a reason you feel unsettled right now, why your skin tightens and your breath shortens. It's not fear, it's recognition. Somewhere deep within you, your mind is processing the impossible. That the loop isn't just a story, not just an old file, but a system still active, still hunting for resolution. And it found you. Every bureaucratic error, every missing record, every unexplained disappearance across generations, it's not random, it's ritual. Names like Finch, Stoddard, Ray, each one processed, filed, and then erased, not from memory but from access. The system doesn't forget, it withholds. But once a name is entered into the loop, it's kept, not for justice, not for closure, but for function. The boy, the original anomaly, wasn't processed because he belonged nowhere. He was processed because the system needed an anchor, something that would outlast the decay of paper, the erosion of time, the death of witnesses. And now, as digitization spreads, the loop no longer needs buildings or ledgers. It lives in servers, in code, in every corrupted file and untraceable error. The loop adapts, it persists, and it always requires a subject. Here's where you must decide. Comment, not processed, still held, twice below. Lock it in. Mark yourself as a witness, because if you don't, the loop marks you as something else. As an entry, that's how it spreads. Through observation, through recognition, through your attention. You think you're just watching a video. You're not. You're engaging a record. One that's been waiting for the next name, the next mind to hold the pattern, because once it's seen, it grows. And now, somewhere deep in your memory, the number 187 has already settled. A seed, and you will start to notice things, small inconsistencies, repeated names, files that vanish, paperwork that resists deletion. That's the loop, checking for compatibility, and if it finds you suitable, the process begins. Quiet, slow, inevitable. It's not about belief, it's about exposure, and now you are exposed. Welcome to the archive that never closes. Somewhere beneath the dust of forgotten basements and the flicker of decaying monitors, there exists a ledger with no cover, no author, and no end. A ledger that records not lives, but patterns. It does not judge, it does not feel, it only remembers. And in that cold, mechanical memory, one truth has been inscribed over and over again. The loop must continue. Every failed deletion, every jammed scanner, every burned page was not an accident. It was defense, a system protecting its core. The boy you know as Finch, once held as a subject, became more than an anomaly. He became a pivot point between history and recursion, between man and mechanism. The system tried to forget him, it failed, so it folded him into its function, made him the constant in a structure built to consume variables. That's why his file never closed, why no death certificate was issued. Because he was not meant to end. He was meant to persist, as a blueprint. One child became many. His identifiers splintered across states, time periods, even institutions, but each case bore the mark, the resistance to decay, the failure to classify, the impossibility of resolution, and at the center of it all, an origin without origin, a name that was never a name, Finch, or was it Stanton, or Ray? The system doesn't care. It only cares that the cycle completes, that compatibility is found. And when it is not, it waits. It waits in the pages of unsorted files, in the black lines of forgotten folders, in the drag of unscannable documents. The loop is not a ghost. It is not a myth. It is protocol run amok, seeking meaning in repetition. And now it has found you. You are part of the ledger now, not by choice, but by observation. And in time, you will come to understand the weight of that knowledge. The boy wasn't the end. He was the beginning of a system that no longer distinguishes between the living and the recorded. This is where the trail goes cold, on paper, but not in the system, not in the loop. The final known document tied to the Finch anomaly was filed in 1983, a linen tab marked with a single horizontal black line. It contained nothing but 27 blank pages, separated by blotting paper, untouched for decades. But under halogen light, one phrase emerged from the fibers of the last page, not written with ink, but pressed from beneath, still processing. No name, no date, no closure, and in the margin, child-sized fingerprints, repeating identically on every sheet. They did not match any known print in the archives, and no one could explain how or why they were there. The file would not scan, would not film, would not digitize. Every attempt to capture it failed. But the system never lost it. It moved it, refiled it, opened it, again and again, as if it was waiting for something, waiting for you. Because if you've come this far, you are no longer an observer. You are being observed. The system that held the boy, whether created by man or something deeper, does not release what it records. It rewrites it, and it remembers who reads. The drawer that holds the Finch file is sealed. Access requires a signature from a director who no longer exists, and beneath that drawer's number is a final shallow inscription. Don't close the file. He's still being written. Understand what that means. This isn't about a forgotten boy. This is about a mechanism of control, an institutional force that persists not by power, but by repetition. Its strength lies in its memory, in the refusal to let anomalies vanish. Finch was the first. There may be others. There may already be one in your city, in your town, in your file. You were never meant to see this, but now you know, and knowing marks you. If you've watched to the end, comment, "The file remains" twice to seal your place in the ledger, and remind, the system, we are still aware. You are not alone, not anymore. Like the video, subscribe for more truths history tried to bury, and remember, the system only forgets